Beyond Stillness, Stories After Stroke is made possible by our guests and tax-deductible donations from friends and listeners like you. Join us in empowering stroke survivors with stories of wisdom, purpose, connection, and hope at www.beyondstillness.org.
This week on Beyond Stillness, Stories After Stroke, we spotlight guest Flannery O'Neil, who suffered a stroke in 2017 and has since devoted her life to the stroke community, serving as a support group facilitator and the COO of Stroke Onward, an organization dedicated to helping stroke survivors rebuild their identity in recovery. Flannery discusses the shock of suffering a stroke at age 34 while living in a small, active Colorado town. She also shares challenges of both visible and invisible disabilities. Flannery's story is entitled The Power of Listening. Thank you for joining us for Part 1, Flannery O'Neil's story. Hello and welcome to Beyond Stillness. Stroke offers a powerful, life-changing shift in perspective. Each colorful memory creates a parable for life's greater teachings, a compass for journeys ahead, and inspired wisdom for unique growth. This radio show, Beyond Stillness, offers an hour of pause for storytelling and reflection. Ultimately, Beyond Stillness is a welcoming environment that reveres the moment beyond stroke's paralysis. Still moments unite humanity and divinity. I'm your host, Molly Bucola. This week, we welcome guest Flannery O'Neil, who loves the outdoors, hiking, and gardening. She spends downtime with her husband and her Boston Terrier mix, Disco. Flannery worked in public health before her stroke in 2017, then was forced to stop and reevaluate her direction. Flannery finds strength and purpose in supporting fellow stroke survivors. Her story is entitled The Power of Listening. And for our moment of pause, we'll do just that, allowing ourselves to settle into this moment. Maybe bringing awareness to the breath or the body in this place. Creating space within our bodies, within our minds, and in our lives. Space to be and space to listen. Today we listen especially to things that may not be said. We listen to our emotions. We listen to that small, still voice within. And with this space, in this space, we ask for courage in order to use our lives to serve others and to be our best selves. And we give thanks. Good morning, Flannery.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Many people view stroke as an older adult's disease, but about 10 to 15% of strokes happen to people between the ages of 18 and 45, and I'm one of those people. 7 years ago, at the age of 34, I experienced an ischemic stroke due to a genetic blood clotting disorder called factor V Leiden. And looking at me now, you might assume that I've returned to normal. In many ways, I have. However, I struggle with invisible disabilities to this day, and I probably always will. I have aphasia, which is a language disorder that is common after stroke, a diminished feeling on the right side of my body, and perhaps most significantly, the lasting emotional impact from this life-altering occurrence. Two things that have become really important to me in my recovery are, one, listening to my body and advocating for myself when I need care, and the healing power of peer support. My stroke story starts in mid-January 2017 in a small town in rural Colorado. I was sitting at a meeting and it was my turn to introduce myself when all of a sudden my right forearm started to tingle and feel numb. I thought it was a little weird, but perhaps I was just nervous. It was unsettling, and when it didn't feel better the next day, I even joked at work that I was having a stroke, but then ultimately brushed it off as carpal tunnel. A week later, I experienced a transient ischemic attack outside of my doctor's office. I had just left an appointment, and on the way to my car, I began to speak incoherently. My hand went completely limp, and I experienced severe confusion. I made it back to the office, but then my symptoms resolved in about 10 minutes. I was scared of what had just happened, but I didn't go get it checked out further. Throughout the next week, there were stretches of time where I had intense brain fog and moments where the perception and feeling in my right hand was off. I knew something neurologic was going on, but it still wasn't enough to make me get it checked out. And I had a doctor's appointment later that week, so I figured I could wait until then. Looking back at the weeks leading up to my stroke, I experienced 6 out of the 10 signs of stroke that women typically experience, including face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulties, disorientation, fatigue, general weakness, and all of that together still wasn't enough for me to go get it checked out. On the day of my stroke, I ended up spending an extended amount of time with my boss because she had been out of town and we needed to get caught up. During that conversation, I developed the sudden inability to speak. There was a deafening ringing in my ears and I could not get any words out. My hand went completely limp and I could feel my cheek drooping. I can still picture the terrified look on her face. She asked if she should call 911 and I nodded yes. That was all I could do. I don't remember being scared, just feeling very calm and wanting to go home and crawl into bed. I tried to tell my boss that my husband was out of town and someone needed to take care of my dog. Thankfully, after she called 911, she brought in a close coworker who knew about my dog and they were able to get her from my house and take care of her. Fortunately, the paramedics arrived very quickly. They asked me all the standard stroke screening questions, but I still was unable to talk and I was having issues coming up with the answers in my head. But I felt very calm still. It was very surreal and very embarrassing to be wheeled out of my office like that. In the ambulance, they asked again if I can speak, and the answer is still no. I remember that very intense feeling of wanting to go to sleep, as if this is all just a bad dream. That 7-minute drive to the hospital felt so long. As we neared the hospital, I was asked again if I could say my name or my birth date, and still I couldn't. I was rushed into a trauma room. They swapped my clothes for a gown, just like a real-life episode of Grey's Anatomy. Off I went for a CT scan where they determined I was having a stroke. However, they thought it was a mild one. Then an MRI was ordered, and about an hour later, my doctor comes running in and told me my stroke was much worse than I thought. I needed to have an IV infusion of the clot-busting medication, and then I would be transferred to Denver, a 7-hour drive away, since there were no inpatient neurologists at this hospital. This is the point that it all became real, and I was completely overwhelmed and scared. Once I was given that treatment, I was immediately transported to the hospital or to the airport, where they loaded me into a small airplane that would take me to Denver. I was positioned looking towards the rear of the plane with a nurse next to me. It was snowing out. I was attached to portable monitors and the screen was resting in my lap. I watched the clock on that monitor so intently. I could tell the time was moving, but I couldn't really identify what time it was. It seemed like the longest, slowest flight of my life. I felt so uncomfortable and unsure of what lay ahead of me. About an hour after the infusion was over, I was able to speak somewhat coherently again and could finally answer the "what is your name" question. But numbers, those are still another story. I could not understand them at all. It must have been 9 or 10 p.m. by the time I was given a room in the neuro ICU. And it was quiet. It was just so very quiet. No noise, no people to distract me. And that's when the worry and the racing thoughts had time to set in. Would I be able to talk again? And when? Could I go back to work? And when? Why did this happen to me? Would it happen again? And why did it happen? The fear just gripped me. I began to be able to say a few words and names. I sat in my room saying them aloud over and over and over. My boss, Leanne, had come to Denver with me since my husband wouldn't arrive until the next day. She kept encouraging me that I needed to sleep, but I was so afraid. I was terrified. If I went to sleep, the few words that I had regained would leave again. Instead of sleeping, I was scanning the room to see if there was anything I could read aloud. I found the whiteboard that detailed my care team and repeated over and over: nurse's name, my name, today's date, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, fall prevention, over and over. Practicing these words gave me a tiny bit of control in this moment where I felt like I had lost all control. The clock on the wall taunted me. Something that used to be so easy for me to read and understand was now so foreign. I would later learn that in addition to aphasia, I also had acalculia, which is the inability to understand and process numbers. But at that time, I just stared, wondering what was that clock for. I quieted down, still trying to process what had happened. How did I have a stroke? I was only 34. I was healthy. It just didn't make any sense to me. And so the story I came up with was that I must be old. I had to be 75, and that's why this happened. Of course, when I was finally able to share that aloud to Leanne, she just laughed and shook her head. No, I was not 75. And yes, strokes happen to people of all ages. After that, I finally relaxed and was able to get a few hours rest. I'll never forget 2 things from day 2. First was the nurse who reassured me I'd be okay after she asked me to describe the steps to make a sandwich, and I was able to do that, although very, very slowly. That gave me a great sense of relief. The second person that day that left an impression was a speech therapist who came to do my first assessment. That was a horribly humbling experience where I could not explain details of very simple images I was shown, couldn't remember number sequences they gave me, nor could I say words like huckleberry or tip-top. She described the stroke like a hurricane and that all of my words were books that had been strewn about. Given time and speech exercises, my language would come back, my library restored. The rest of the day would go on to be very hard, settling into being ill, but I was bolstered by the confidence that they had in me. I stayed in that ICU for 2 days, and over the course of those days, I was observed for any adverse effects of the medication and assessed to determine the impact on my stroke. Speech was the worst of my issues. Thankfully, I was able to be discharged home, but with virtually no follow-up instructions. Once home, my family and coworkers had to advocate on my behalf to get the follow-up doctor's appointments I needed to start my recovery. I started working with a speech therapist to try to regain my communication abilities. A humbling and unnerving experience. Before my stroke, I had a good vocabulary and wrote and spoke with ease. My career was focused on public health, and I had a leadership role in the local public health department, all of which requires extensive knowledge and deep language abilities. Now I'm sitting in a room, struggling to name even 5 words that start with the letter B. I was shaken, my confidence in the gutter. How would I ever be able to get back to me? Because certainly this was not me. I was struggling to reconcile my identity, this new me, with who I was just days before. I acutely felt the lack of control that I once had when the words that I sought to say out loud just simply would not come. I'm so thankful for my speech therapist who not only helped me rebuild my communication abilities, but helped me with so much more. They helped me figure out how I could and would re-enter the world. While after a few months of therapy, I had regained a lot of speech and was close to graduating, I still didn't feel whole or like myself. It would be a few months before I realized that I had emotional and spiritual healing to do too. But in that moment, they helped me take those first steps towards getting back to life in my new body. A body that came with new sensations, new thoughts, and new feelings. After we got through the practical exercises to help with my word finding and the many, many math problems, they helped me to work through how to live in this body and this changed sense of self. It felt so lonely being ill, especially in my little mountain town where many people enjoy outdoor recreation, but I couldn't do that anymore because of the fatigue from my stroke. I spent so much time searching Google, clinging to the hope that I'd find answers to questions like, when can I go back to work? Will I be able to do the same activities I enjoy before? Will my partner and my friends still want to be around me? My therapist helped me to break down these questions into concrete goals, and we made a plan for me to follow. One of the most important parts of this time in my healing was to learn patience and repetition and recovery. Changes aren't going to happen overnight, but healing and rebuilding is totally possible. Some of our work was very practical. I brought my work computer in and we practiced reviewing written materials and spreadsheets until I felt confident that I could do that competently as part of my job. But they also helped me navigate some of the invisible challenges. I had started back to work very part-time, just a few hours a day, 2 to 3 times a week. Things that felt so easy before were very hard in my new body. I was exhausted after only a few hours and needed to rest while at work and when I got home. I felt like a failure. Why was this so challenging? I was also surprised when attending my first staff meeting, and I was completely overwhelmed by being in a large, noisy crowd of my coworkers. Before my stroke, I organized and helped run these meetings, and now I could barely stand to be in the back of the room. My therapist immediately reassured me that the fatigue and the sensitivity to noise is very common after stroke. What I was experiencing was all normal, and it would get much easier with time. Having them to lean on and help me understand and process my new realities really helped ease the challenge and encouraged me to keep moving forward. In the months after my return to work, I focused on my physical recovery. And while I continued to struggle with aphasia and fatigue, I was doing fairly well and thought I had comfortably shifted into my new normal. About 6 months after my stroke, I started a leadership training course. This course was something I'd been looking forward to before the stroke, one that several of my colleagues had already participated in. To start off our first session of this course, we paired up into groups and were sent off for team building on a high ropes course. Our guide walks us out to our first activity, an intimidating ropes activity high up in the trees. Having filled out a medical release form, the guide knew about my stroke and had asked me to wait until last to try out the course. After watching all of my colleagues go through this course, I was nervously waiting for my turn. And then I was abruptly told I could not do it because of my medical history. What? Why? I could not understand why I was being held back. And then all the emotions that were pent up from the last 6 months just came flooding out, and I started crying and I couldn't stop. In the flash of a moment, I realized I had so much more healing to do. And it wasn't just the physical recovery that I needed to do, but also an emotional recovery. After that day on the ropes course, I sought out mental health therapy, which helped me greatly. But I still felt like something was missing, a connection to others who had walked the same path as me. I sought out peer support, but in my small town, it was hard to come by. The nearest support group was more than an hour's drive away. Driven by the impulse that this would be helpful, and by the fact that I also needed a project for my leadership course, I decided to build a support group in my community. Armed with information on how to build this group and with a connection to another local survivor, we built it together. It was slow to grow, but eventually we had a consistent group of participants that joined monthly for meetings. Together, we processed our experiences, shared accomplishments and frustrations, and learned how to live in our new bodies. Apart from speech therapy, this has been the most impactful part of my recovery. About a year after my return to work, I decided I wanted to dedicate my professional time to improving the stroke care system. There was just so much to be done. That first took me to the American Heart Association's Quality Improvement Team, where I learned much more about the stroke system of care, and particularly how strokes are treated in the hospital. After 2 years there, I joined an organization called Stroke Onward, where I am the Chief Operating Officer. At Stroke Onward, we're solely focused on the emotional recovery from stroke and how to rebuild our identities after stroke. So much of the conversation about emotional recovery focuses on diagnosable mental health conditions, such as depression and anxiety. These are very important conditions that must be treated, but only focusing on them does a disservice to all of us trying to better understand the wider impact that stroke has on our lives and how to move forward from this traumatic experience. My story is just one among millions of survivors working to rebuild a life of meaning, purpose, and joy. In this journey, I have met and been inspired by so many others who have helped me understand that recovery is possible. I've learned many lessons in this experience, but two of the most important to me are to listen to my body and advocate for myself, and that we're not alone in this. The connections I have made with other survivors have lifted me up on my down days and enabled me to be a support to others in the same way on my good days. Telling my story, whether it's through podcasts like this one or in a support group, has helped me to take ownership of my experience, giving me the feeling of control. It has helped me heal and give back to others. Stroke can be life-changing, disrupting our abilities, altering our lives in ways that we never thought possible. And yet, we are so resilient, and there is reason for so much hope. Our bodies and minds are capable of so much healing despite these changed circumstances.
Wow, Flannery. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your detailed and very well-written story.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving me the platform to do that.
You are so welcome. We'll close with a moment of pause, slowing down in this moment. Flannery spoke about an opportunity to slow down, an opportunity to shift our perspective on life, an opportunity to grow in new ways, an opportunity to create community, and an opportunity to listen. Today, we are grateful for opportunities that sometimes may appear as challenges. Grant us a creative mind and a courageous spirit to take a leap in order to transform, to redirect, and to rewrite our futures. Today we pause to listen for a new way forward, to listen to that still small voice, and to listen to our bodies that are unique and uniquely inspired. And we give thanks. Thank you for devoting time and space to listen to Part 1, Flannery O'Neil's story. Stick with us for Part 2, Flannery O'Neil's interview. Each colorful memory creates a parable for life's greater teachings, a compass for journeys ahead, and inspired wisdom for unique growth. In this episode of Beyond Stillness, Stories After Stroke, we heard from guest Flannery O'Neil, who suffered a stroke in 2017 at the age of 34. Flannery shared ways she found support and inspiration and community while discovering balance and purpose after her stroke. Again, thanks for listening. And remember, as part of the stroke community, you are more than supportive. You are inspirational.
If you are part of the stroke community and have a story you'd like to share on the show, please contact us. Email molly@beyondstillness.org.
Beyond Stillness, Stories After Stroke is made possible by our guests and tax-deductible donations from friends and listeners like you. Join us in empowering stroke survivors with stories of wisdom, purpose, connection, and hope at www.beyondstillness.org. Another way to support is to like, share, or subscribe to our weekly show. Again, thank you for devoting time and space for this week's episode of Beyond Stillness, Stories After Stroke.